Good morning. Welcome to OAC, and thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this. Thanks so much to our musicians. I look forward to Songs from the Sofa every single week, and this is such a wonderful experience. So thank you so much for everything you do. I don't know about you, but I really appreciate our pastor. I love the way Pastor Rhoda stretches us. I love the way she stretches me. She suggested 2 topics for this particular presentation. And either one of them would have taken me to new places, and I love that. So, a new experience for me, and I hope it helps you. Is anyone else a news junkie? Somehow the day isn't complete until you've had your news fix. Some TV news, spiced up with social media, talk radio, maybe a podcast or 2. If you are, I think you'll see a pattern emerge. It feels like no one is in control right now. And there's a real trust deficit towards those who claim they are. Life feels like it's all about the luck of the draw in some ways. And sometimes it's just plain impossible to find meaning amongst the memes. People of faith like you and I struggle to make sense of it all too. The questions we ask may be different. We ask, where's God in all of this? Why do some people effortlessly experience God even in times like this, while others don't, no matter how hard they try? There are so many ways to talk about this. Some find it helpful to talk about God's dark intimacy. And that's what I'd like to talk about today, because it's real for so many of us, and also because of the celebration of Purim that happened yesterday in the Jewish community. All around Oak Ridge there are a number of synagogues, and those synagogues celebrated a very special feast yesterday. And so we're going to take a respectful journey into part of the Old Testament. I deliberately say respectful because while we Christians read and love the Old Testament, it was actually someone else's text first. So just like we acknowledge that our church is located on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, we acknowledge with gratitude that the Old Testament is first the sacred text of the Jewish people, and we will walk gently and respectfully into it. The Feast of Purim has its roots in the book of Esther, where it says, these days were to be remembered and to be celebrated in every generation and in every family, every province and every city. The Jews were not to fail to observe these days of Purim. The remembrance of them was not to cease among their descendants. So, let's take a look at the Feast of Purim, but let's do it from the perspective of someone who celebrates it regularly.
Purim, the Jewish Halloween, in that there's costumes and parties and in absolutely no other respect. Purim commemorates the victory of the Jews in Persia over their archenemy Haman, or in English, Haman, as told in the book of Esther. For synagogue-going Jews, celebrating Purim starts on the evening of the 14th of Adar with reading the Megillah, the scroll that tells the story of Esther. The reading is lively. In costumes, people boo and spin groggers every time the villain Haman's name is said. It's taught he was descended from Amalek, a people the Torah commanded Jews to remember to forget. So yelling over his name is a way to continue blotting Amalek out. Less traditionally, some communities will cheer for Vashti, whinny for horses, etc. Hearing the entire Megillah, every word, is the biggest commandment of Purim. There are shorter Purim spiels, comedic sketches, with actors, puppets, and of course, YouTube videos. In communities around the world, there are other traditions too. Visiting the tombs of Esther and Mordechai in Iran, dragging Haman effigies around in Yemen, and striking stones with Haman's name on them together in France. The 10 chapters of the Megillah go as follows. King Ahasuerus tells his wife Vashti, "You won't show yourself off for my friends? New wife, please." So all of the women are like, "Me?" And King Ahasuerus says to one named Esther, "Yes, you." Now, Esther was Jewish, but her uncle Mordechai tells her, "Mum's the word." Meanwhile, in the palace, the king's advisor Haman says, "I'm great, you should all bow to me." But Mordechai says, "Nah, a public act of bravery. So Haman says, I'm mad now, so I'm going to kill all the Jews. In protest, Mordechai wears a sack and stops eating, and other Jews follow. More public bravery. Perhaps you're noticing a theme? And Esther does something that could get her killed. She goes to King Ahasuerus and says, hey, man wants to kill me. So, King Ahasuerus says, let's kill him instead. My new advisor is Mordechai. Let's have a parade. And they do. The end. God isn't mentioned once in the story. Instead, it's a tale of political maneuvering, personal activism, and communal bravery against an anti-Semitic plot. The sages teach God's presence hides beneath the surface in all of the acts of bravery. These acts are centered around standing up for what's right, and what better way to commemorate that than by getting drunk, dressing up, and partying? It's an Ashkenazi tradition to dress up for Purim. Maybe in homage to the hidden miracles, maybe because Esther pretended to not be Jewish, or maybe thanks to 15th century Roman carnival customs. While the holiday of Purim goes back over 2,000 years, dressing up for Purim started right around then. In Israel, this has been adopted by the Sephardi community and is all around a big deal. There are family-friendly parades, huge street parties, and tons of carnival-themed club events. This holiday gets even the most secular folks out to celebrate. If you go to a synagogue for Purim, you have a good chance of running into goofy melodies used for the usual prayers, a costume contest, a preschool carnival, and piles of hamantashen. In Israel, they're called oznei Haman. They're three-cornered cookies. The best ones are stuffed with chocolate. This is a fact, not an opinion. Poppy seed ones can be pretty good, and if you're unlucky, you might get stuck with one of the fruit-filled ones. The three sides represent Haman's hat, or his ears, or our forefathers, or dice from the royal game of Ur. Who knows? There's all sorts of reasons given. Around the world, there are other special Purim foods, like Iraqi chickpea turnovers, and Moroccan sweet Purim bread with a hard-boiled egg inside it. Enough about food. There's also an obligation to drink, until you can't tell the difference between the phrases, cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. This is a holiday requirement that rabbis have debated for centuries, asking, really, are we really required to drink this much? With a short answer of, well, yeah. If you can, this is a good holiday. Like most Jewish holidays, there's also a big meal, a Purim Seudah, and some extra prayers. Outside of eating, listening to the Megillah, and drinking, there's a few other mitzvot for Purim. On Purim Day, like all Jewish holidays, it starts at night and continues into the next day. You're supposed to give gifts to friends called mishloach manot, or shalach manos in Yiddish. This joy-spreading commandment requires you to give at least 2 portions of food to a friend, but more is always more fun. People deliver mishloach manot to their friends by hand and at parties, sometimes through synagogue fundraisers. Also, it's a mitzvah to make gifts of money to at least 2 needy people. This Purim tzedakah is called matanot la'evyonim. Purim literally translates to lots, as Haman casts lots to decide what day to destroy the Jewish people. Pur, notably, is also in the name Yom Kippur, and there are some neat connections between the 2 holidays. Purim can inspire. The Jewish people can unite across geography and time to see the hidden, to overcome adversity, and to celebrate. Chag Purim Sameach. Happy Purim.
There is so much there. The first time I watched, my mind started racing. She mentions Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and we've developed a detailed understanding of that day. And then drinking until you don't know the difference between Haman and Mordecai had me going back to Genesis chapter 3 and the temptation of the serpent and the desire to know both good and evil. But it always bothers me when others tell me what I believe because they so often get it wrong or don't see the nuances. So I decided to read the rabbis and let you hear some of their ideas today rather than my own. Because I discovered wisdom that speaks to how life doesn't always make sense and God is present even when it doesn't seem like it. And we need to hear that right now. And hearing it in a different voice could be really health-giving too. And so to Esther, which is a strange and surprising book. The name Esther is translated as hidden, and Megillah can mean the scroll or revealed. So Megillah Esther can be translated as revealing the hidden. Which reminds me of playing hide and seek as a child, and maybe that is central to the understanding of the book of Esther. So I'd like you to use your imagination with me. Imagine a group of rabbinic students and teachers talking together in a yeshiva. A yeshiva is a place where students get together to understand the word and to understand the God of the word, and they are passionate about it. They really get excited about the text, and it gets pretty intense and very insightful. And in the middle of this conversation, one says, Purim is greater than the day on which the Torah, that is, the 10 Commandments, was given. Now that gets my attention, and it got the attention of other rabbis, and a huge conversation started, and someone says, to try and wrap our heads around this, imagine with me a knight in shining armor who saves the fair maiden from a wicked dragon. He valiantly slays the dragon, carries the fair maiden off on his beautiful white stallion, because that is the way it always is in stories like this. He gives her drink, feeds her, provides fine clothing and jewelry, whispers kind and soothing words into her ear, and then eventually proposes marriage. What's she going to say? What choice does she really have? And now back to the 10 Commandments, and we hear a rabbi reading Exodus 19, verse 17. Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their place at the foot of the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, the rabbi says, can be translated underneath the mountain. The mountain is aimed at them like a barrel, so they had no choice but to accept, which is what this knight in shining armor analogy is all about. Another rabbi says the mountain was an embrace of overwhelming love. So when Rabbi Avdimi described the mountain over their heads like a barrel, it was a kind of embrace from all directions. Just as Torah embraces every limb of our body and every action of our day. But it was an embrace too great to resist. And another rabbi responds, sure, everyone knows that. There's been a teaching that the 10 Commandments are a ketubah, a marriage document. Nevertheless, in the days of Ahasuerus, they revisited the whole thing and accepted it. It even hints at that in the Megillah, where it says in chapter 9, verse 23, so the Jews committed themselves to continuing what they had begun to do and to what Mordecai had written to them, continuing what they'd begun to do back at Mount Sinai. But back then, they were overwhelmed by the romance of it all. But the question is, what made it complete acceptance in the days of Ahasuerus? When there was no mountain, no booming voice, no multi-sensory experience. What made it different? Because what spoke that day was something way more powerful. A shuddering silence and a chilling void. And we continued to speak in the rabbi's voice. All that was left was the Jew, and the Jew had to decide, am I still a Jew? Jews that had been exiled from their homeland for a long time. The prophet Jeremiah had told them the exile would last 70 years, but that was more than 70 years ago. The prophet Ezekiel described in the new temple they would build in Jerusalem. King Cyrus had even authorized its rebuilding, only to shut the project down shortly afterwards. You see, it's one thing to travel through a dark tunnel waiting for the light. It's another to see that light begin to shine, only to have an iron wall slam down on it. And back in the book of Esther now, the king's prime minister, a wealthy and powerful megalomaniac, proposes a plan to annihilate all Jews on a single day. And the king agrees and drinks to the occasion, because there's lots of drinking by the king in the book of Esther. And the knight in shining armor, by all appearances, has long forsaken the lady he claimed as his wife. He was nowhere to be found. So put yourself back in Shushan. Like most Jews, you've made your way into society, you speak the language, you own a nice date orchard, along with an international spice shop. You make business with Persians and Medes and Babylonians and all the many ethnic groups that make up the vast trade empire of the time. And you're all buddies. And now, suddenly, those business friends despise you. They despise your family, they despise your entire people, just because you're a Jew. Within a matter of weeks, the atmosphere in the market has changed. You Jewish? I don't buy from Jews. Hey, Haman is planning to kill all you guys. Why don't we take care of it right now? And no. Those aren't empty threats. You're hearing more reports every day. Yes, it does sound familiar. It's called Jewish history. But let's get it straight. This had never happened this way before. Never since the birth of this nation were Jews ever put through the crucible of face-to-face anti-Semitism in a foreign land. So, if someone stops you on the street and asks, "Hey, are you Jewish?" what would be the sensible response? Simple. "No, I'm a pedestrian," and just keep right on walking. They say, "You dress Jewish," so you'll dress Persian. They say, "You speak with a Jewish accent." You can fix that too. They say you hang out with Jews and go to their prayer services. You have no icons on your front lawn. You don't come to the big fire worship ceremonies. Look, if it's going to save the lives of you and your family. But that's not what happened. For some reason, Jews remained Jews openly and proudly. They suffered threats, harassment, violence, boycott, divestments, and estrangement for an entire year. But they remained Jews. They gathered publicly outdoors to pray. They refused to bow to Haman. They taught their kids to do the same. They said, "We are Jews. Maybe God has abandoned us, but we have not abandoned him." Being Jewish is not something duct taped onto us. It's certainly not inculcated into us. It's not something we've received, not something we own. Nothing can rip it out of us. Nothing can rip us from it, because it is us. And at Sinai, writes Rabbi Shneur Salman, the love poured down from above. In Shushan it rose from below. And that's the core essence of the Jew that awakened and matured for an entire year in an ancient Persia until it blossomed on Purim, and hence the party. At this moment we acknowledge with gratitude there's much wisdom in what the rabbis teach. Wisdom that spills over into our lived experience as well. I love how seeing things from the perspective of a different tradition opens us up to a whole new set of possibilities and questions. And so, I've been sitting with this story for about a month now. Maybe some of what I've been experiencing as I've prayed through Esther and the rabbi's teaching will resonate with you. So here's some of the things. At times as I did this, it led to introspection. Questions like, how deep-seated is being a follower of Jesus in me, in us? I mean, we can't see our being a worshipper of God embedded in a national cultural identity. After all, there are around 50 nationalities represented in the OSC community, so we need to look somewhere else. Another thing, it's easy to worship when love pours down, but there are times of darkness, just like the story of Esther. We live in times of political intrigue and a sense of randomness. Sometimes it's really hard to see God. And then another thought crossed my mind. There's so much hiddenness going on in the book of Esther. And Purim is about revealing hidden things. Esther's true identity was hidden. Haman's true character was hidden. And celebrating Purim involves wearing masks for that reason. I wonder if you would agree with me that the longing to be known and the desire to hide are in both of us. The longing to be known and the desire to hide are in both of us. If someone asked, "How are you?" what would your answer be? If they asked, "How are you really?" how would that change your answer? And then things got deep for me. In what ways am I contributing to the apparent hiddenness of God? Is my God talk good news to anyone and everyone who hears it? Are there times when my God talk actually adds to the hiddenness of God? Or are there times when my God talk is more about me believing that God can't be present if I don't mention him? The great paradox of Esther is that God is amazingly present even where God is most conspicuously absent. God is active even when God's name isn't mentioned. I can't help but think of Jesus' last words in Matthew 28. He says, go and make disciples of all nations. And then he makes the promise, and surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. And then what does he do? He leaves. The tension of the book of Esther is in our experience too. So with that in mind, I started a practice of whenever I entered a space or a conversation, I would say quietly to God, God, you've been here for a long time, long before I arrived. What are you up to here? How can I be part of that? And then, in the middle of all of this, the realization came to me that while we don't have a national identity to lean on, and we have seen how badly it goes when people co-opt Jesus into any national identity, the reality is there is something that we can lean on and lean into, and it's the faithfulness of Jesus as the foundation of God's good news for Christians and for the world. Just as Purim helps our Jewish friends celebrate God's deliverance and helps them find identity and a reason to celebrate, our faith tradition has those too. One of them that we resonate with is a passage found in the book of Revelation. Revelation 14:12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. So I decided to check out what the complete Jewish Bible said about this and how they translated this. Here's what it says. This is when perseverance is needed on the part of God's people. Those who observe his commands and exercise Yeshua's faithfulness. Different take on it slightly, right? One of the theologians of our faith community picked up on this and suggests another way to read Revelation 14 verse 12. Here are those who hold firm to the way of God as it was revealed by the faithfulness of Jesus. In a world that is questioning where God is and what God's self could be doing in the world, and those questions come into our minds too, the way to anchor our thoughts is the faithfulness of Jesus rather than our faith. Holding on to him at all times, even when the questions multiply and the silence is deafening. Oh, and one more thing I learned from Purim. Remember to take time to celebrate. I'd like for us to pray together on this, and I've asked the worship team to lead us in prayer. So let's pray this song.